Today, we'll be covering the Archfiends of Envy, the Cyclops. There was once a town that was famous for producing excellent blacksmiths. Even in this town, however, there was one blacksmith who stood out as the best of all. Though the weapons he made looked rather unrefined, they were always both sturdy and sharp. He reasoned that weapons were designed to maim and kill, and as such did not require decoration. His weapons were the best despite his humble nature. The man knew this to be true, and yet it seemed the world did not agree with him. In terms of popularity, he was always a distant second. Customers preferred weapons forged by another blacksmith, a gentle and significantly younger man. The younger blacksmith's weapons truly dazzled, captivating potential customers. But for the blacksmith, deemed to be in second place, these were scarcely real weapons at all. Weapons were for killing, not for dressing up and showing off. He grew frustrated and decided that something must be done. In the days that followed, the blacksmith worked with renewed zeal and vigor. He had to prove to the world that he was the best. He worked himself to the bone, and yet nothing changed. Customers still preferred the other blacksmith's trinkets. The reason was simple. The younger man's work had become more refined and polished than ever. Even the old blacksmith realized that his rival had overwhelming talent. But consumed by envy, his pride prevented him from an actual admission. Heavy drinking ensued, and his health began to deteriorate as a result. One day, as he lay suffering in his bed, a strange vision befell him. A chalice appeared before his eyes, shrouded in a pure white glow. It spoke to him in soundless words. If you wish to fulfill your desire, make an offering. The more valuable your offering, the greater the fulfillment. The blacksmith felt a rare confidence swelling up inside him. He was sure that if he obeyed the voice, his heart's desire would be fulfilled. Alas, he soon realized that he did not have a suitable offering. He had already sold everything he owned and spent the money on drink. Suddenly, the blacksmith had a thought. There was something he could offer, something close to hand: his flesh. He decided to give an eye as his offering. He had two of them after all. Losing one would be of no consequence. He needed both his arms and legs for his work, but an eye was a small price to pay. The pain was unbearable, and the blacksmith writhed in agony on the floor. He contracted an intense fever that did not subside for several weeks, but it was a small price to pay indeed, for what he had created was no ordinary weapon. It was a trident covered in countless twitching eyeballs. Once thrown, it guided itself towards its target. It never missed. The blacksmith convulsed with delight. He had created his masterpiece. Once the world saw this, he would finally be recognized for his talent. Alas, he couldn't have been more wrong. No one wanted to buy a weapon with such unsettling looks. The blacksmith grew angry. Still, people refused to see the true value of his work. The worst of it was the blacksmith knew exactly why his weapons were unpopular, and the reason enraged him. They're just ugly, people would say. The blacksmith decided to take action. It was several days before they found the knight's body. An eyewitness reported that he had been murdered by a one-eyed monster, and slaying its victim, the beast had raised its weapon high as though putting it on display for all to see. This is what became of the blacksmith. A weapon's value is determined only by the number of lives it claims, and so remains the blacksmith's belief, even as the monster he has become. The trident no doubt seeks its latest victim even now, and will continue to do so until the blacksmith receives the recognition he so craves. The Leviathan. There was once a kingdom whose queen had given birth to twin princes. Naturally, the rarity of royal twins brought a great deal of attention to the kingdom. For the two princes, a life of sibling competition lay in store. Who was born first? Who would be the first to smile? Who would be the first to turn over in their sleep? The first to walk? The first to speak? The first this? The first that? The older prince, a bright and well-built boy, was loved by everyone in the kingdom. He was also superior to his younger brother in every single respect. As the younger prince grew older, Comparisons with his brother grew more frequent and more unfavorable. His envy was compounded, and he became a maudlin young man. His father, the king, naturally focused all his love of and affection on the older twin. He began to distance himself from the younger prince, finding him a singularly difficult character. They rarely exchanged words. Though he kept him at a distance, the king still showered his younger son with gifts, trying to ensure there was plenty to keep him occupied. The prince would take these gifts down to his room in the castle dungeons and smash every one to pieces. After all, the prince understood that his father did not love him. On his 10th birthday, the younger prince was given a bird. He began to torture it, and before long it was dead. The bird sang its last. A shiver ran down the prince's spine. He had never experienced pleasure like this before. Tormenting a weaker being had given him a momentary sensation of power. He quickly asked his father for another bird, then another after that. When he had grown tired of torturing bird, he turned his attention to different animals. All sorts of creatures were delivered to the dungeon where the prince could toy with them as he pleased. One day a reptile from a distant land was delivered to the prince. A crocodile, they called it. A grin spread across the young prince's face when he laid eyes on his latest plaything. He liked the crocodile's violent nature. Its jaws looked easily strong enough to mangle a man's limbs. The prince kept his powerful new pet in a special cage, one that allowed him to abuse it in safety. After all, he was better than this crocodile. This gave the younger prince, who had always been unfavorably compared to his brother and scorned as a result, a sense of self-worth, a sense that he could only achieve by comparing himself to something else. The prince started to favor his crocodile over the rest of his menagerie. Of all the animals he tormented, it was abusing the crocodile that gave him the greatest sense of superiority. Several years passed, the king grew old and decided that it was time for an heir to inherit his throne. That he would choose the older prince was a foregone conclusion. A world of difference separated the princes. Compared to his sturdy brother, the little princeling was positively spindly. The young prince spent his brother's coronation down in the dungeons, feeding his crocodile. Dark thoughts filled his mind. If he could only release the giant crocodile from its cage and sneak it into his brother's room, surely even his brother couldn't overpower it. He could kill his brother at any time. His life was at his mercy. He was, in other words, more powerful than his brother. He was soon bent double in manic convulsions of laughter. One day the new king went to visit a neighboring country. In his absence, the younger prince acted as though he owned the castle. With his brother gone, killed, mangled, the young prince's wild thoughts grew stronger, hardening into a firm desire that began to gnaw at him. All of a sudden, a curious chalice appeared and spoke to the prince. "I can fulfill your desire," it said, "for a price." These words filled the prince with conviction. Somehow he knew the chalice was not lying. The price paid was his beloved crocodile. He sacrificed it without a moment's hesitation. The prince began to undergo a metamorphosis. His skin became scaly and his jaws became wide and powerful. Most notable of all, however, he became much, much bigger. Soon he had grown too big for the dungeon, the walls of which collapsed under the pressure of his expanding body. Soldiers and other servants were crushed as the crocodile prince's body swelled. And still he continued to grow. "Who's the little brother now?" he thought to himself. His limbs burst through the castle walls and his neck thrust out of the front gate. Still, he did not stop growing, and before long the prince was carrying the entire castle on his back as he walked around. By the time his growth had ceased, the prince had lost all grasp on reason. The crocodile's cruel, violent instincts had overwhelmed him. Though he could no longer be considered a human prince, there was one thing, one feeling he retained from his previous life. A feeling that could not be abated. A feeling of inferiority. The strength of this feeling was revealed when the destination of the castle-carrying beast became apparent. He was going to the country his brother was visiting, going to fulfill his original desire, his desire to see his brother mangled in his jaws. Cinderella. Three beautiful sisters once lived in a castle town. Their legs caught the eye, especially long and elegant and fair as any sculpture. They were famous throughout the town. Those legs, even the prince heard tell of the tale, and so he invited them to a royal ball. But only two of the sisters would attend. The elder girls bullied the youngest daily, so it was little surprise they forbade her from going. Instead, she would languish at home, burdened with chores. The youngest envied her sisters' glamorous lives and dreamed of the ball nightly. The middle sister was quick to notice. "Make me a new dress," she said, "and I shall take you with me to the ball." She wore a sneer as she spoke, but her starry-eyed sister didn't notice. She began immediately. Desperate to attend, the youngest crafted a masterpiece. It was a dress any would envy. The middle sister was stunned, though her sneer was quick to return. She brazenly denied ever making a promise with her sister. The youngest was left speechless. How rotten could a person be? The girl was furious. Every slight and insult she'd endured rushed back, boiling over. Of all the selfish, petty, cruel, time after time after time, the youngest was thoroughly disgusted. She was upset at being tricked, but still more by the fact that she was related to such a woman. But she would take no more. From the nearby woods, she faced a centipede and mixed its poison into her sister's food. The middle sister grew ill until she was bedridden. The youngest saw an opportunity. She would have her secret wish. She would attend the ball. She donned the dress she made for her sister and borrowed shoes and jewels from the immobilized girl's collection. It was a masked ball. If she dressed the part, no one would notice. But everyone noticed her that evening. The mask hid her identity, but not the allure she exuded. Her gorgeous legs had every man in attendance slavering. They flocked like ants to a lump of sugar. The girl was thrilled. After that night, each time a ball was held, she attended in disguise. In the blink of an eye, this mysterious masked beauty was famous. As she grew used to the attention, her demure nature changed. She began seducing men, toying with them for the span of a night. She never removed her mask, but her legs alone lured them in. All who saw them up close agreed that this was a pair of legs fit to entrance the prince, for it was said the prince was a great lover of legs. It was part of why the girl's sister had forbidden her from attending the ball. They knew that of the three of them, the youngest had the finest legs of all. Even with their face fully covered, they knew. Show those long, slim legs and men would be hers. In time, the prince was bound to notice her and not them. Their envy would allow no other woman that place, not even a sister. For all their differences, the younger still shared the same jealous blood as her sisters. She envied any woman who drew attention away from her, even a sister. The leg-loving prince had recently grown close to the eldest sister, which displeased the youngest. For human greed knows no bounds. For where simply attending her first ball had been enough for the girl, she now expected her choice of men, and she chose her sisters. Or perhaps it was revenge that motivated her, retribution for those years of abuse. She poisoned her eldest sister, just as she'd done before. Given the eldest dress to wear, she could easily impersonate her. The devious plan was proof she shared their callous blood. So she stole the gown and set out for the ball. She was summoned to the prince's room alone. He had no idea this masked beauty was another. The rumors of his fetish rang true. He caressed her legs with his cheeks, then began to lick her toes. It felt as if slugs roamed her body. His heavy breathing and slurping tongue sounded out in perverted harmony, yet the performance was cut short before its climax when the prince suddenly stopped. These are not her legs. His love of legs was stronger than she'd known. Even masked, he'd seen through her ploy by the taste of her legs alone. Confronted by the prince, she fled his chambers. In her haste, she dropped a shoe. Days passed. The mysterious minx who deceived the prince was wanted throughout the kingdom. Whomever the shoe fit would be the guilty woman. Men were dispatched and the grand search began. The women of town were gathered and tested. The girl panicked. Sure, she'd been caught. And what then? Would she be jailed, tortured, worse? Perhaps a recent rash of poisonings would come to light. She hurried to destroy the evidence. In her maddened state, she thought to crush her own legs, and so she took a large rock to them, splintering her bones. Barely conscious amid the pain, she wept bitter tears, partly from the sensation, but even more so at the loss of her perfect legs. That was when a strange sight appeared to her, a white chalice, floating as it spoke to her mind. Pay the price and your wish will be granted. The girl accepted its voiceless bargain. She might have wished to evade the law, but no, she had yet to truly give up. The prince would yet be hers. All three sisters believed a woman's worth was measured by the quantity and quality of the men she snared. The girl gave up her legs entirely. Next, she took something precious from her eldest sister, not the bedridden woman's dresses or finery, but the legs that had won the prince's heart. Given those, he would be hers. With new legs, she would also elude capture from her crimes. It took time to adjust to them. A sense of otherness remained, her sister's smell, perhaps. But in a few days, her blood had circulated through them, and they were hers from top to toe. The next ball came round. She donned her sister's gown and approached the prince again. Even so recently duped, he trusted her at a glance. And why not? They were without a doubt his love's legs. Yet still he saw through her deceit at first taste. You are not she. How? How could he have known? They were her sister's legs, and yet, again she ran, eluding her pursuers. She fled to the heart of the forest. How? 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 Thwarted, she gave up impersonating her sister, but she would not give up the prince. If anything, her obsession grew stronger. She would have him. She would prove her worth as a woman. She stalked women with beautiful legs, claiming them for her own, then approached the prince anew. But none met with his approval. These are not the ones, he'd say, and no matter how beautiful, he sent them away. For she made a false assumption. He was an unparalleled leveler of legs, yes, but it was not their appearance that excited him. He did not lick them merely in appreciation. Their flavor was a part of his enjoyment, for it was the unique scent they bore that fascinated him. Unaware of this, the girl still sought legs to please the eyes, and at any cost, even the beauty of the rest of her form. She recalled the centipedes in the wood by her home, their countless legs, and so she replaced her lower half with that of a centipede. Surely the prince could find a pair of legs among so many to entice him. To enhance their beauty, she turned them to glass. She was a work of art. She felt his approval was assured, yet at the first sight of her monstrous form he ran in terror. So she chases him even now, her countless legs never ceasing. Should she catch him, she'll ensure he gets a good long taste of them, whether he wishes to or not. The Succubus. She never did have much luck with men. The man she was seeing could never get steady work, and the moneylenders were after him. He came to see her sometimes, or so she thought, but he only ever came to coerce her for more money to fritter away. Had he spent it on repaying the moneylenders, perhaps there could have been some salvation for him. He chose to spend it on drink and gambling instead, and whatever money he'd taken from her would always run through his fingers like sand before the day was out. He was every inch a wastrel. From the time they started seeing each other, it didn't take long for him to bleed her dry. Come the day she told him that she hadn't any money left to give, he flew into a rage and threatened to leave her if she didn't start earning some more. He was a dreadful man, an utter wastrel who only thought of the women as an open purse. Despite that, she loved him, and she had come to her own understanding as to why. He was just like her father, who had passed away when she was a girl. Her father was another depraved thug who had no qualms about abusing women. She had vivid memories of how he would beat her mother. Her father died in the bottom of a bottle. Her mother, though she had been abused by him for years, had been driven mad with grief at his loss. As a girl, the woman could see the depths of her heartbroken mother's love for her father. That was before she understood her mother's feelings. How could the scum be worth anything, she'd wondered. Yet once she grew up and became a woman, she became painfully aware of the similarities between her and her mother. She understood exactly what her mother had felt. She just couldn't leave this hopeless man. The more worthless he became, the more infatuated she became in turn. The more she thought about how the man couldn't live without her to support him, and how she was giving him life itself, the more alive she felt. She was by no means a particularly attractive person herself, she thought, and by supporting him, she had acquired a reason to live. There was no other place for her in the world except for by his side. She decided to wander the streets, selling candles to scrape together some money. Her mother did just the same once for her father's drink money. However, the woman herself was not so lucky. Not a single person would buy her candles. When she told her lover, he only shouted at her and called her useless. The man would leave her if she didn't make the money. She had been dimly aware that all the man needed from her was for her to be his money spinner, no more. He did not need the woman herself, yet she needed him. Were he to leave her, she would be alone. Having lost both her parents at an early age, in her eyes, the mere idea of being alone cast the shadow of a terrible monster. In a way, they were in the same boat. For her, any man would do as long as he kept her loneliness at bay. Though she had realized this, she was still haunted by the fear that he would leave her. Calling out to passerbys as she might, she still couldn't sell a single candle. A man walking by bumped into her shoulder. The candles went tumbling down into the street. The man didn't even apologize. He just flew into a rage and shouted at her, "Get out of my sight, you eyesore! Filthy scrubber!" He ground the candles into the cobblestones under his boot and marched off. Picking up the broken pieces, the woman was filled with sorrow. "I'm going to die a miserable death," she thought. "I'm going to die just like my mother." She was bitterly jealous of anyone who had a home to go back to. Not just a house, a home, a sanctuary. She had never found such solace in her entire life. She hurried after the man who ran into her. From afar, she gazed at his home. He seemed to be living happily with his family. What happened next was beyond her control. She was holding a lit match. She reached for a candle to light, but barely noticing the match already gone from her fingers, flames started to take the house before her. As she watched the flower fires rise, she felt a kind of relief. Yet gradually, colors faded into the heart of fire, and the image drained away. It had all been an illusion, a mere image of a happy life with one's beloved. The illusion vanished along with the flames. From that night, a rash of arson attacks spread throughout the town. The culprit was none other than the candle seller, of course. The vision of flames she'd seen had sunk its hooks in her. The appearance of the vicious arsonist was the talk of the town. The townspeople were in a state of panic, and the town strengthened its guard. One night the woman was witnessed setting a fire, and the town guard apprehended her. She was jailed and interrogated. She admitted to everything, even about how she'd been trying to sell candles for the man she loved. Yet the local officer performing the interrogation only seemed confused. There was no trace of her lugger, no matter where they looked. When they searched her house, all they could find were rows of candles, each sculpted into the form of a man. None of the local residents recalled of such a man, no matter how they scraped their memories. The man was just part of her delusion, a fantasy character she'd dreamed up. Unable to withstand her loneliness, she'd spun elaborate illusions within the confines of her mind. She'd been seeing a man who simply didn't exist. When they told her this, she refused to accept it. She could still vividly recall his face and the sound of his voice. In her view, even if she had gone mad long ago, there was no way for her to identify what had been real and what had been fantasy. Terrified of the truth, she had no intention of finding out. Just at that moment, an eerie vision appeared before her. It was a white chalice floating in the air, and it spoke to her. "Make the sacrifice, and I can fulfill your desire." Was this just another illusion? That was when she realized, illusion or not, what did it matter? The only thing that mattered was whether or not she thought it was real. Her heart still ached keenly at the memory of her love. He did exist in the world that she saw. She decided to prove it. She started by transforming herself into a candle that would burn well. Then she set fire to her head. That was where her lover lived. Amidst the burning flames, the lover in her mind appeared. She showed off her fantasy born from flame, as the sparks of delusion scattered over her surroundings, at the same time convincing herself that she wasn't alone. They say that she left nothing but ashes in her wake. She continued to start fires to this day, fires that cast her shadow lover against the walls of the world. Thank you for listening. Have a good one.